The paper felt wrong in Eleanor Ripley's hands. Not wrong like a mistake. Wrong like a secret that had been buried alive, clawing its way back into the light after 50 years of suffocation. She stood frozen in the dim, mahogany-paneled study of the Calloway mansion, her cleaning supplies scattered at her feet, her mother's old feather duster still clutched in her trembling left hand. The document she'd found tucked behind a loose panel in the antique desk wasn't supposed to exist. According to every story she'd ever heard, every whispered conversation at family dinners, every tear her grandmother had shed before she died, this paper had been destroyed decades ago. But here it was. Real. Tangible. Damning. Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another story that's going to shake you to your core. I'm so glad you're here with me today. Seriously, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing where this community stretches across the globe. And listen, if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel brings you stories of justice, redemption, and truth that'll have you on the edge of your seat. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you do not want to miss what happens next in this one. Now, back to Eleanor. The signature stared up at her like a ghost demanding recognition. Two names, side by side in faded ink, Harrison Calloway and Samuel Ripley. Her grandfather, her granddad's signature, right next to the signature of the man whose marble floors she'd scrubbed this morning. The man whose crystal chandeliers she'd dusted. The man who paid her mother minimum wage to clean the mansion built on what should have been their family's fortune. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. The document header read, Founding Partnership Agreement, Calloway and Ripley Manufacturing, 1953. Below it, clear as day, both parties agree to equal ownership, 50% shares each, in perpetuity. 50% each. The words blurred as her eyes welled up. She'd grown up in a two-bedroom apartment where the heat didn't always work in winter. She'd watched her mother's hands turn arthritic from decades of scrubbing other people's homes. She'd listened to her grandmother sob about how Samuel Ripley had been bought out for almost nothing when times got hard, how Harrison Calloway had promised to take care of them forever. Forever had meant 3 generations of poverty, while the Calloways lived in splendor built on her grandfather's dreams. The study door creaked. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She spun around, the document crackling in her grip, and found herself face to face with the man himself. Harrison Calloway stood in the doorway, 83 years old, silver-haired, wearing a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than her car. His pale blue eyes, usually warm and grandfatherly during his rare interactions with the staff, had gone wide. Not with confusion, with recognition. He knew exactly what she was holding. Put that back. His voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. Right now, Eleanor's entire body shook, but her hands held firm. That's my granddad's signature on the deed, she said, her voice cracking but fierce. Samuel Ripley, your partner. The color drained from Harrison Calloway's face. For a moment, he looked like he might collapse. His hand shot out to grip the doorframe, knuckles white, and Eleanor watched as 50 years of carefully constructed lies crashed down in his eyes. You don't understand, he started. I understand perfectly. Eleanor's voice gained strength with every word. The weight of 3 generations of injustice poured into her spine, straightening it. My granddad co-founded this company with you. 50-50. You bought him out for pennies when he was desperate, when he had medical bills and a baby on the way. You promised to take care of the family forever. She held up the document, her hand steady now. But this says you never had the right to buy him out. This says the partnership was in perpetuity. This says half of everything you built. This mansion, the factories, the fortune, belongs to my family. Harrison's face had gone from pale to gray. He stumbled into the room, his hand reaching out not in threat, but in something that looked horribly like pleading. Eleanor, please. You have to understand the context. It was different then. Samuel wanted to sell. For $5,000. The number came out like poison. Eleanor had heard it her whole life. The amount that was supposed to change their lives. The amount that had disappeared into medical debt within 6 months. $5,000 for half of what became a $100 million empire. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like the room might cave in under its weight. Harrison Calloway stood there, this titan of industry, This pillar of the community with buildings named after him, staring at a cleaning woman's daughter, holding the proof of his greatest sin. And for the first time in probably decades, he had no power, no control, no clever words to make it all go away. Because the truth was simple, typed out in black and white on paper that had somehow survived when it should have been destroyed. Samuel Ripley had owned half of everything, and that meant Eleanor's family owned half of everything now. The implications crashed through the room like thunder. 50 years of wealth redistribution, 50 years of legal battles, 50 years of lies unraveling. The Calloway name, pristine, respected, powerful, about to be dragged through every courtroom in the country. Eleanor watched it all play across his face. The calculation, the desperation, the fear. "You need to give me that document," Harrison said, and now his voice had changed. Gone was the pleading. This was the voice of a man who had built an empire through whatever means necessary. "Name your price. Everyone has one." But Eleanor just clutched the paper tighter and thought of her grandmother crying at the kitchen table. Her mother's crooked fingers. The opportunities she'd never had because the money that should have educated her, elevated her, given her choices had been stolen before she was born. "There is no price," she whispered. "This isn't for sale. This is justice." And in that moment, everything changed. Eleanor Ripley hadn't always been brave. As a child, she'd been the quiet one. The girl who kept her head down in school when classmates whispered about her worn-out shoes. The teenager who'd worked double shifts at the diner while her friends went to prom. The young woman who'd taken the cleaning job at Calloway Mansion because it paid $3 more an hour than anywhere else. Even though every step through those marble hallways felt like walking through her family's graveyard. Her mother, Christine Ripley, had raised her on stories and silences. Stories about Samuel Ripley, the grandfather Eleanor never met, who died of a heart attack at 47, broken by poverty and betrayal. Silences about the Calloway family, because Christine had learned early that bitterness didn't pay the rent and pride didn't put food on the table. "We survive," Christine used to say, her arthritic hands wrapped around cheap tea. "That's what Ripleys do. We survive." But surviving wasn't the same as living. And Eleanor had spent 26 years learning the difference. She'd watched her mother clean these same floors for 18 years before her own knees gave out. Watched her grandmother, Sarah Ripley, die in a county hospital because they couldn't afford the good doctors, the ones the Calloways used, the ones whose salaries were paid by money that should have been partly theirs. Watched opportunities slip away because college tuition was a fantasy and dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford. Eleanor had learned to make herself small, invisible, just another face in the uniform, pushing a cart of cleaning supplies through rooms filled with more wealth than she'd see in 10 lifetimes. Until today. Now, standing in Harrison Calloway's study with proof of her family's stolen legacy clutched in her hands, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been compressed and suffocated for generations suddenly expanding, filling her lungs, straightening her spine. She wasn't small anymore. Harrison was still staring at her, his expression cycling through emotions like a man drowning. "You don't know what you're doing," he said, and there was something almost pitiful in his voice. "The lawyers will bury you. Do you have any idea what it costs to fight people like us?" "People like us?" Eleanor repeated. "You mean people like you?" "Because there is no us, Mr. Calloway. There never was." She thought of her best friend, Nina Hopper, who worked as a paralegal downtown. Nina, who'd been telling her for years to stand up for herself, to demand more, to stop accepting scraps. Nina, who'd probably scream with joy when Eleanor told her what she'd found. Nina, who knew lawyers. Real ones. The kind who took cases like this. "My grandfather trusted you," Eleanor said quietly. "He called you his brother." "That's what my grandmother said." Samuel and Harrison, inseparable since they were kids, built that first factory together with their bare hands, stayed up nights designing machinery, dreamed about changing the world. Harrison's jaw tightened. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, maybe, or memory. "We were friends," he admitted, his voice rough. "Best friends. But you don't understand the pressure I was under. The company was failing. We needed capital. Samuel was sick. His medical bills were. So you took advantage of him." Eleanor's words cut clean. "When he was most vulnerable, most desperate, you offered him pennies and made it sound like salvation. And then you made promises you never intended to keep." "I did keep them," Harrison's voice rose, defensive now. Your grandmother received a monthly stipend for years. Your mother had a job here. I've taken care of. You gave us crumbs from a table we should have been sitting at. Eleanor's voice didn't waver. You paid my mother minimum wage to scrub toilets in a mansion built with my grandfather's ideas, his work, his partnership. You call that taking care of us? The silence that followed felt like the space between lightning and thunder. Harrison moved to the leather chair behind his desk, the massive mahogany desk that had probably cost more than Eleanor's entire annual salary. He sank into it slowly, suddenly looking every one of his 83 years. What do you want? Eleanor had been poor her entire life, but she'd never been stupid. She knew this moment was dangerous. Knew that Harrison Calloway had more power in his little finger than she'd ever possessed in her entire body. Knew that he could make her life very difficult if he chose to. But she also knew something else. He was terrified. Because that document in her hands wasn't just paper. It was dynamite. It was the kind of evidence that ended legacies, destroyed carefully constructed images, turned titans into criminals. I want what's mine, Eleanor said simply. What's always been mine. What you stole from my family. Harrison's hands were shaking now. He clasped them together on the desk, trying to hide it, but Eleanor saw. The company is worth over $200 million now, he said. Are you telling me you think you're entitled to half? I'm not entitled to half, Mr. Calloway. Eleanor placed the document carefully on the desk between them, her finger pointing to her grandfather's signature. I own half. Legally. According to this partnership agreement that was never legally dissolved. She watched his face pale further, if that was even possible. My family has suffered for 50 years while yours thrived. Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside her. My grandmother died bitter and broken. My mother's body is destroyed from decades of hard labor. I grew up wearing secondhand clothes and eating pasta 7 nights a week. And for what? Because my grandfather got sick? Because he trusted his best friend? Harrison opened his mouth, closed it again. For the first time since Eleanor had started working at the mansion, she saw him as something other than the untouchable billionaire. She saw him as a man who'd made a terrible choice 50 years ago and had spent every day since trying to justify it. I have grandchildren, he said quietly. They've grown up with this wealth. This is their inheritance, their future. Eleanor thought of the children who would never be born into the opportunities she'd been denied. The future Ripleys who would grow up in poverty because of one man's betrayal. And what about my future? She asked. What about the children I might have someday? Don't they deserve the inheritance my grandfather built? The study door burst open before Harrison could respond. Grandfather, I heard shouting. The man who entered stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes landing first on Harrison's ashen face, then on Eleanor standing defiant behind the desk, then on the document laid out between them like evidence at a crime scene. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd seen him before, of course. Daniel Corleone, Harrison's grandson, 32, Harvard law graduate, heir apparent to the Calloway empire. He visited the mansion occasionally, usually breezing through inexpensive suits that probably cost more than her car, barely acknowledging the staff except for polite nods. But she'd never been this close to him, never seen the sharp intelligence in his dark eyes, or the way his jaw tightened as he processed the scene before him. Never noticed how he moved with the kind of confidence that came from never having to question whether you belonged somewhere. Daniel, Harrison said, his voice strained. This doesn't concern you. Doesn't concern me? Daniel's gaze fixed on the document, and Eleanor watched his expression shift from confusion to something harder to read. He stepped closer, his presence filling the room in a way that made Eleanor's pulse quicken, though whether from attraction or fear, she couldn't tell. That's the partnership agreement. The original. I thought it was destroyed. Eleanor's eyes snapped to him. You knew about this? I'm a lawyer, miss. He paused, realizing he didn't know her name. Ripley, she said, lifting her chin. Eleanor Ripley. Samuel Ripley's granddaughter. Something flickered across Daniel's face. Recognition, maybe, or shock. He looked at her differently now, not as invisible staff, but as someone who suddenly mattered. Someone who was about to blow his entire world apart. You're Christine's daughter, he said slowly. The woman who cleans the East Wing. The woman who shouldn't have to clean anything in a house her family half owns. Eleanor shot back. Daniel moved closer to the desk, his eyes scanning the document. Eleanor watched him read. watched the lawyer in him process every word, every signature, every legal implication. His face remained carefully neutral, but she saw his hands clench at his sides. "This is authentic," he said finally, looking at his grandfather. "Why didn't you tell me this existed?" "Because it was handled decades ago," Harrison said quickly. "Samuel was bought out. Fair and square. There was a separate agreement." "Show me." Daniel's voice was sharp, professional, the voice of a lawyer who'd just realized his client was lying. Harrison's silence was deafening. "There is no other agreement," Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength from Daniel's reaction. "Because your grandfather never legally dissolved the partnership. He just waited for mine to die and hoped everyone would forget." "That's not," Harrison started, but Daniel held up a hand. "Don't." Daniel's word cut through his grandfather's protest. He turned to Eleanor, and she found herself caught in his gaze, intense, calculating, but also something else. Something that looked almost like respect. "Do you have a lawyer, Miss Ripley?" "Not yet," Eleanor admitted. "But I will by tomorrow morning." "Good." Daniel straightened, and Eleanor saw him make some kind of decision. "Because you're going to need the best. My grandfather has an entire legal team that will try to bury you in motions and delays and technicalities." "Daniel." Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. "What are you doing?" "My job," Daniel said quietly. "I'm a lawyer, grandfather. I took an oath, and that document is legally binding." He looked back at Eleanor, and this time there was something in his eyes that made her heart stutter. "If what you're saying is true, if your grandfather never legally sold his shares, then you have a legitimate claim to half of Callaway Manufacturing." The room spun. Eleanor had expected resistance, threats, attempts to buy her off or intimidate her. She hadn't expected Harrison Callaway's own grandson to essentially validate her claim. "You're out of your mind," Harrison hissed, standing abruptly. The movement made him sway, and Daniel moved instinctively to steady him, but the old man waved him off. "That company is your inheritance. Your future. Everything I've built was built on fraud," Daniel finished, his voice hard. "Wasn't it?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Eleanor watched grandfather and grandson stare at each other across a chasm that had just opened between them. 50 years of family loyalty cracking under the weight of truth. "You don't understand what it was like back then," Harrison said, his voice breaking. "The pressure, the competition. Samuel was dying, and the company needed. Samuel was your best friend." Eleanor's voice cut through his excuses like a blade. "He trusted you with everything. With his dream, his legacy, his family's future. And you betrayed him when he was most vulnerable." Daniel's jaw clenched, and Eleanor saw something shift in his expression, a kind of realization that looked painful. "Is that true, grandfather? Were you really best friends?" "We were brothers," Harrison whispered, and for the first time, Eleanor heard genuine emotion in his voice. "We built everything together. But when he got sick, when the bills started piling up, when the company was struggling, I did what I had to do to survive." "You did what you had to do to steal," Eleanor corrected. "Miss Ripley," Daniel said, and his voice was gentler now. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What do you want from this? Money? The company? Justice? Revenge?" Eleanor met his eyes and saw something unexpected there, genuine curiosity. Not judgment, not dismissal, just a lawyer trying to understand his opposing party. Except she wasn't sure if they were opposing anymore. "I want what was stolen from my family," she said. "I want recognition that my grandfather built this empire just as much as yours did. I want my mother to stop destroying her body for minimum wage. I want," her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. "I want my grandmother to have died knowing the truth came out." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then you need to take that document and get it authenticated immediately. Carbon date the paper, verify the signatures, document everything. And then," he paused, seeming to wrestle with something, "then you need to file suit before my grandfather's lawyers can build a defense." "Daniel, for God's sake," Harrison started. "I'm done, grandfather." Daniel's voice was quiet but absolute. "I'm done pretending the foundation of our wealth isn't built on betrayal." He turned back to Eleanor, and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Determination mixed with something that looked almost like admiration. "I can't represent you. Conflict of interest. But I can point you towards someone who will take this case and fight like hell for you." Eleanor's mind reeled. 5 minutes ago, she'd been alone against a billionaire. Now she had Harrison Calloway's own grandson offering to help her destroy his family's legacy. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" Daniel's smile was sad and complicated. "Because I became a lawyer to uphold justice, Miss Ripley, even when it cost me everything." The look that passed between them in that moment was electric, attraction and respect, and the terrible knowledge that they were on opposite sides of a war that would tear both their families apart. Outside the study windows, storm clouds gathered over the Calloway mansion, and Eleanor clutched her grandfather's partnership agreement tighter, knowing that everything was about to change. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of chaos that felt like drowning and flying at the same time. Eleanor sat in Nina Hopper's cramped downtown apartment, the original partnership agreement locked in a safe deposit box at the bank, certified copies spread across the coffee table like weapons being prepared for war. Nina had called in every favor she had, connecting Eleanor with Margaret Shaw, a litigation attorney known for taking on impossible cases against powerful families and winning. Margaret was 53, sharp as broken glass, and when she'd examined the document, her eyes had lit up like Christmas morning. "This is airtight," she'd said, tapping the signatures with one perfectly manicured nail. "Partnership in perpetuity. No dissolution clause. No buyout provision that supersedes the original agreement. Eleanor, if we can prove there was never a legal sale of shares, you don't just have a case. You have a nuclear bomb." The carbon dating came back first, paper manufactured in 1953. The signature analysis followed, genuine, both of them, with no signs of forgery or alteration. Every test, every expert, every piece of evidence confirmed what Eleanor's heart had already known. Her grandfather had been robbed, and now, finally, someone was going to pay. But victory tasted more complicated than she'd imagined. The Calloway legal team struck fast and vicious. Within 48 hours of Eleanor filing her lawsuit, they'd responded with a motion to dismiss, claiming the statute of limitations had expired decades ago. They argued that Eleanor's grandmother had accepted regular payments from Harrison, which constituted acknowledgement of the buyout. They painted Samuel Ripley as a willing seller who'd made a bad business decision and was now being opportunistically exploited by descendants with no legal standing. "They're going to make your grandfather look incompetent," Margaret warned during their third meeting. "They're going to drag your family's name through the mud, question every financial decision your grandmother ever made, imply that you're nothing but a gold digger who got lucky finding an old document." Eleanor had expected this. What she hadn't expected was how much it would hurt, or how much Daniel Corleone's involvement would complicate everything. He'd kept his word about not representing his grandfather, officially, but Eleanor saw him everywhere. At the courthouse during preliminary hearings, sitting 3 rows behind the Calloway legal team, his expression unreadable. At the coffee shop near Margaret's office, where he'd, accidentally, run into Eleanor and spent 20 minutes talking about nothing and everything. "I shouldn't be talking to you," Eleanor said during their third chance encounter, though both of them knew these meetings weren't chance at all. "Probably not," Daniel agreed, stirring his coffee with the kind of casual elegance that came from never having to think about money. "But I'm not working on the case, so technically, there's no ethical violation." "Technically," Eleanor repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You're splitting hairs. I'm a lawyer. That's what we do." His smile was slight, but it transformed his face from handsome to devastating. "How are you holding up?" The question was simple, but the way he asked it, with genuine concern, without pity, made something crack in Eleanor's chest. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Your grandfather's lawyers are trying to paint my family as con artists. They're claiming my grandmother knew about the buyout, that she accepted it, that we have no right to anything." "She received monthly payments," Daniel said carefully. "My grandfather kept records. $200 a month from 1955 until she died in 1998. "Guilt money," Eleanor said bitterly. $200 a month while he made millions. While your family lived in mansions and mine lived in apartments where the heat didn't work." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I know, and I'm sorry. Not just for what my grandfather did, but for benefiting from it my whole life without knowing." "Did you really not know?" Eleanor asked, studying his face. "About the partnership? I knew there had been a partner once. My grandfather mentioned Samuel a few times when I was young, always vaguely, always changing the subject when I asked questions. When I went to law school, I did some digging through old company records. He paused, his expression troubled. I found references to the partnership, but all the official documents showed a clean buyout in 1954. I thought it was legitimate. I didn't know about the original agreement until I saw it in your hands. Eleanor wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it scared her. Because somewhere between the courthouse hallways and these coffee shop meetings, she'd started to see Daniel Corleone as something other than the enemy. Started to notice the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he listened when she talked about her family, the way he seemed genuinely torn between loyalty to his grandfather and commitment to what was right. Your family hates me, she said quietly. Yes. Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. My mother hasn't spoken to me since I refused to pressure you into dropping the suit. My sister called me a traitor. My grandfather. He stopped, something painful crossing his face. He's not well. The stress is affecting his heart. Guilt stabbed through Eleanor's chest. I'm not trying to kill him. I know. You're trying to get justice. There's a difference. Daniel reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of touching hers. But justice comes with casualties. Are you prepared for that? Eleanor thought about her mother, who'd cried when she heard about the lawsuit, but not from joy. Christine Ripley had spent 50 years learning to be invisible, to not make waves, to survive by not fighting. The idea of standing up to the Callaways terrified her more than continued poverty ever had. My mother wants me to drop it, Eleanor confessed. She's afraid. Says the Callaways will destroy us, that we should take whatever settlement they offer and disappear. Will you? No. The word came out fierce and certain. I can't. This isn't just about money, Daniel. It's about my grandfather's name, his legacy, proof that he mattered, that he built something real, that he wasn't just Harrison Callaway's charity case. Daniel nodded slowly, and Eleanor saw something shift in his expression, respect deepening into something more complicated. Then you need to be ready for war. Because my grandfather's lawyers just filed for an emergency injunction to freeze all company assets pending the outcome of the case. If they succeed, it could drag this out for years. Years? Eleanor's stomach dropped. Margaret said we could get a preliminary hearing in months. That was before they brought in Thomas Kane. Daniel's expression darkened. He's the best corporate defense attorney on the East Coast. Specializes in burying plaintiffs under mountains of procedural motions. He'll delay, deflect, and drag this case through every possible appeal until you run out of money or will or both. Eleanor felt the walls closing in. Margaret Shaw was working on contingency, but even that had limits. If the case stretched on for years, if every motion required experts and depositions and endless court appearances, how long could she survive? She still had to work, still had to pay rent, still had to live while fighting a legal battle against people with unlimited resources. I won't give up, she said, but her voice wavered. Daniel finally closed the distance between their hands, his fingers brushing against hers. The touch was electric, inappropriate, dangerous. Then let me help you. You can't. Conflict of interest. Not as your lawyer. His eyes held hers, dark and intense. As someone who wants to see the truth come out. I have access to old company records, correspondence between my grandfather and yours, documents that might support your case. Things the legal team won't turn over in discovery because they don't technically have to. That's, Eleanor's breath caught. That's betraying your family. My family betrayed yours first. Daniel's grip tightened on her hand. And maybe it's time someone in the Callaway line did the right thing for once. The coffee shop noise faded around them. Eleanor knew this was a turning point. Accepting Daniel's help meant pulling him deeper into the war, making him choose her side over his blood. It meant crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed, building something between them that would either save them both or destroy them completely. Eleanor said yes. 3 weeks later, she found herself in Daniel's downtown apartment at midnight, surrounded by boxes of documents he'd smuggled from his grandfather's private office. The space was elegant but impersonal. Expensive furniture that felt more like a hotel than a home, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. Daniel worked at the dining table in a wrinkled dress shirt, sleeves rolled up, tied discarded hours ago, looking nothing like the polished heir she'd first met. Here, Daniel slid a folder across the table, his expression grim. Letters between your grandfather and mine from 1953. Read the one dated November 14th. Eleanor opened it with trembling hands. Samuel Ripley's handwriting. She recognized it from the few birthday cards her grandmother had saved, filled the page in careful script. Harrison, the doctors say I have 6 months, maybe less. My heart is failing, and there's nothing more they can do. I know we talked about me selling my shares, but I've been thinking, what if instead, you hold them in trust for Sarah and the baby? Keep the company running, take your salary, but when profits come, split them. This way my family will always be taken care of, and our partnership continues even after I'm gone. You're my brother, Harrison. I trust you with everything. Samuel. Eleanor's vision blurred. Her hands shook so violently that Daniel gently took the letter from her before she could tear it. There's more, he said quietly, pulling out another document. My grandfather's response. He never sent it. I found it in his desk, unsent. This handwriting was Harrison's, bolder, more aggressive. Samuel, I understand what you're asking, but it's not practical. A trust would complicate everything. Taxes, management decisions, future expansion. You need money now, for treatment, for your family. Let me buy you out cleanly. I'll make sure Sarah and the baby are taken care of. Monthly payments, guaranteed. You have my word. H. He convinced your grandfather to sell instead of setting up the trust, Daniel said, his voice thick with disgust. Convinced a dying man that cash was better than ownership. And then, he pulled out a bank statement from 1954. He paid $5,000. The company was valued at over $80,000 at the time. Eleanor's breath came in short gasps. He stole it. While my grandfather was dying, he stole everything. Yes. Daniel's jaw was tight. And it gets worse. He spread out more documents, corporate filings, expansion plans, patent applications. 6 months after your grandfather died, Harrison filed for 3 patents on manufacturing processes. Look at the design signatures. Eleanor leaned closer. There, in the corner of each technical drawing, 2 sets of initials, HC and SR. They designed these together, she whispered. My grandfather's work. His innovations. Which my grandfather patented solely under Callaway Manufacturing after Samuel was dead and couldn't object. Daniel's voice was raw. Those patents are the foundation of the company's success. The machinery designs that made us millions. Half of them were your grandfather's ideas, and Harrison just took them. The room spun. Eleanor had known about the stolen partnership, but this was theft layered upon theft. Not just money, but legacy. Her grandfather's genius, his creativity, his innovations, all erased, credited to Harrison Callaway alone. Why are you showing me this? Eleanor asked, looking up at Daniel. This destroys your family's entire reputation. Everything you've built your identity on. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because 3 days ago, I found something else. He pulled out a final folder, this one marked with his father's name. Richard Corleone, personal. My father died 10 years ago. Heart attack. I was 22. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the folder. I thought I knew everything about him. But in my grandfather's safe, hidden behind a false panel, I found this. It was a letter dated 2005, in Richard Corleone's handwriting. Father, I can't live with this anymore. I found the original partnership agreement while settling legal affairs. I found Samuel's letters begging you to set up the trust. I found the patent applications with his initials that you filed after his death. You built our fortune on betrayal. Everything I've given my children, every advantage they've had, is stolen. I'm going to the Ripley family. I'm going to make this right. I'm sorry I didn't find the courage to do this years ago. Richard. Eleanor's throat closed. He was going to tell us. He died 2 weeks after writing this. Daniel's voice cracked. Massive heart attack. The doctors said it was genetic, stress-related. But my grandfather was with him that day. They'd argued. The whole house heard them shouting. The implication hung in the air like poison. You think your grandfather. Eleanor couldn't finish the sentence. I don't know. Daniel's face was anguished. I want to believe it was just tragic timing. But the letter disappeared. The partnership agreement stayed hidden. And my grandfather suddenly became very invested in my legal education, in making sure I understood family loyalty above everything else. He stood abruptly, pacing to the windows. My father was a good man, Eleanor. He would have done the right thing. And maybe that's why he's dead. Eleanor rose and moved to him, her hand finding his arm. The touch anchored them both. Daniel. He turned, and she saw tears on his face, the first crack in his composed exterior. I love my grandfather. He raised me after my father died, taught me to play chess, helped me through law school, made me believe in honor and integrity. His laugh was bitter, and all of it was a lie. Not all of it, Eleanor said softly. You chose honor. You chose integrity. That's real, even if he isn't. Daniel's hand covered hers, warm and solid. I'm choosing you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not just your case. You. And that's terrifying because we're on opposite sides of something that's going to destroy both our families. Then maybe we build something new, Eleanor whispered. Something honest. The space between them charged with electricity. Daniel's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. If we do this, he said, if we pursue this case with everything I've found, it won't just bankrupt my family. It'll prove that my grandfather is a thief and possibly worse. It'll mean I can never go home again. I know what I'm asking you to give up, Eleanor said, her heart breaking for him even as hope bloomed in her chest. But those patents, those letters, they prove everything. They prove my grandfather was a genius who was robbed. They prove you own half of everything, Daniel finished. Not just the company. The patents, the properties, 50 years of profits. With this evidence, Margaret can argue for retroactive damages. You won't just win, Eleanor. You'll destroy us. Their faces were inches apart now, breathing the same air, balanced on the knife's edge between justice and mercy, between duty to family and something deeper. I'm sorry, Eleanor whispered. Don't be. Daniel's forehead touched hers. Someone should finally pay for what was stolen. The kiss happened like inevitability, like lightning finally striking after years of building storm. Desperate and tender, wrong and right, tasting of tears and truth. When they broke apart, everything had changed. We present this evidence tomorrow, Daniel said. Together, let the truth burn everything down. Part 6, Darkest Hour. The courthouse felt like a tomb. Eleanor sat beside Margaret Shaw at the plaintiff's table, the manila folder containing Daniel's evidence burning like fire in her hands. Across the aisle, Thomas Kane and his team of corporate lawyers sat in pristine suits, radiating expensive confidence. Behind them, Harrison Calloway, gaunt now, oxygen tubes running to his nose, looking every bit the frail old man being persecuted by greedy opportunists. Daniel wasn't there. Eleanor's stomach churned. He'd promised to testify, to present the evidence himself, to stand beside her when the truth finally came out. They'd rehearsed his testimony in his apartment until 3 a.m, fortifying each other with coffee and stolen kisses and the shared weight of what they were about to do. But his seat in the gallery remained empty. He'll come, Margaret whispered, though doubt edged her voice. He's probably just. The courtroom doors opened. Eleanor's heart leaped, then crashed. It wasn't Daniel. It was his mother, Victoria Corleone, immaculate in Chanel, her expression carved from ice. She moved to the defense table, leaning down to whisper something to Thomas Kane. The lawyer's expression shifted from confident to triumphant. Eleanor's hands went cold. Your Honor. Kane stood, his voice booming through the courtroom. The defense would like to submit new evidence that fundamentally undermines the plaintiff's case. Judge Richardson, a stern woman in her 60s, raised an eyebrow. Proceed. Kane pulled out a document, and Eleanor's world tilted. Even from a distance, she recognized it, the partnership agreement. But something was wrong. He was holding 2 copies. This is a signed dissolution agreement dated December 1954, Kane announced, bearing the signatures of both Harrison Calloway and Samuel Ripley. It clearly states that Mr. Ripley sold his 50% stake for $5,000 and released all future claims to the company. That's impossible, Margaret hissed, half rising. We have the original partnership agreement, that says. That says nothing about dissolution terms, Kane interrupted smoothly. The partnership agreement the plaintiff discovered establishes the original arrangement. This subsequent document, properly notarized and filed with the county clerk's office, legally terminates that arrangement. We have the certified county records to prove it. Eleanor's vision swam. It's a forgery. It has to be. But Kane was already presenting expert testimony. Handwriting analysis confirming Samuel Ripley's signature, carbon dating placing the document in the correct time period, County filing records from 1954 showing the dissolution was officially registered. How? Eleanor whispered desperately to Margaret. How is this possible? Margaret's face was ashen. If it's real, if there truly was a legal dissolution filed, and we missed it in our initial search, she didn't finish. She didn't have to. The case was over. Judge Richardson examined the documents with meticulous care. Ms. Shaw, did your team search county records for any subsequent agreements or dissolutions? We did, Your Honor, but Margaret fumbled through her files. This wasn't there. We checked every filing from 1953 through 1960. This document didn't exist. And yet here it is, Keynes said, properly filed, properly executed, proving that Samuel Ripley willingly and legally sold his shares. The plaintiff's entire case rests on the false premise that no such sale occurred. Eleanor felt the world crumbling. 50 years of injustice. Vindication finally within reach, and now. The courtroom doors burst open. Daniel strode in, disheveled, his suit jacket missing, a bruise darkening his left cheekbone. Behind him, 2 police officers flanked a man Eleanor had never seen before. Elderly, nervous, wearing the tired uniform of a county clerk. Your Honor, Daniel's voice rang out. I apologize for my tardiness. I was retrieving a witness who can testify about the authenticity of that dissolution agreement. Victoria Corleone's composure cracked. Daniel, what are you doing? The right thing, Mother. Daniel's gaze was steel. Finally, Judge Richardson's gavel cracked. Mr. Corleone, you're not counsel of record in this case. What is the meaning of this disruption? I'm a witness, Your Honor, and I'm bringing evidence of fraud. Daniel gestured to the elderly clerk. This is Robert Chun, former assistant county clerk from 1952 to 1987. Mr. Chun, can you tell the court about the document Mr. Kane just presented? The old man's hands shook, but his voice was clear. That dissolution agreement was filed last month. Not in 1954. The courtroom exploded. Kane shot to his feet. That's absurd. We have dated filing stamps. Forged, Daniel cut in. Mr. Chun kept personal logs of every corporate filing during his tenure. Those logs are now county records. There is no entry for a Callaway-Ripley dissolution in December 1954 or any other time. That document was backdated and inserted into the archives 4 weeks ago. That's a serious accusation, Judge Richardson said sharply. I have proof. Daniel pulled out a flash drive. Security footage from the county records building showing my uncle, James Corleone, accessing the 1954 filing archives 3 weeks ago. He's on the board of Callaway Manufacturing. He has the resources and motive to create a convincing forgery. Victoria stood abruptly. This is character assassination. My son has clearly been compromised by his inappropriate relationship with the plaintiff. I have evidence. Daniel's voice cracked like thunder. I have the real records. I have testimony from the document forger my uncle hired. He's in protective custody right now, ready to testify that he was paid $200,000 to create a period-accurate dissolution agreement. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Daniel had done it. He'd discovered the forgery, tracked down the evidence, destroyed his family's last defense. And then she saw his face. The cost was written there in every line, every shadow. The bruise on his cheek wasn't from an accident. Someone had tried to stop him. His own family had tried to stop him from testifying. Your Honor, Thomas Keynes said, his composure finally cracking. I was unaware of any forgery. If what Mr. Corleone says is true, I've been deceived by my clients. If it's true, Judge Richardson interrupted, her voice like iron. This court has been the victim of attempted fraud. I'm ordering an immediate investigation. This hearing is suspended pending review of Mr. Corleone's evidence. And someone explained to me why there's a bruise on this witness's face. My uncle, Daniel said quietly. When I confronted him with the evidence this morning, he tried to convince me to stay silent. He assaulted you. Eleanor stood, unable to stay silent any longer. They assaulted you to keep you quiet. Daniel's eyes met hers across the courtroom, and Eleanor saw everything there. Love, determination, grief for the family he'd just destroyed, and something that looked like goodbye. Bailiff, Judge Richardson commanded. I want James Corleone located and brought in for questioning. This hearing is adjourned for 72 hours. The gavel fell like a gunshot. Eleanor tried to reach Daniel, but Victoria Corleone moved faster, grabbing her son's arm with surprising strength. "You've destroyed us," she hissed, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "Your grandfather is dying, and you've killed him. We're ruined. The company will collapse. The family name is finished. And for what? For her." Daniel's face was anguish. "For the truth. Get out," Victoria snarled. "You're not my son anymore. You're nothing." Eleanor watched Daniel's face shatter, watched him look back at his grandfather, who sat silent, tears streaming down his withered face, and then at her. "I'm sorry," he mouthed. And then they were dragging him away for his protective custody testimony, and Eleanor was left standing in the wreckage of both their families, victory ashes in her mouth, wondering if justice was supposed to feel this much like losing everything. This is devastating. Comment below if you think Eleanor and Daniel can survive this. And subscribe because the next part will determine everything. Eleanor stood in the rain outside the county jail at 2 in the morning, her umbrella forgotten in the car, water streaming down her face mixing with tears she'd been holding back for 3 days. Daniel was inside. Protective custody had turned into something more complicated when James Corleone's lawyer had filed countercharges, accusing Daniel of theft, of breaching attorney-client privilege, of conspiring with Eleanor to extort the family. All lies, but lies with enough legal weight to keep Daniel locked up until the preliminary hearing. "He won't see you," the desk sergeant had said, not unkindly. "He's refused all visitors except his lawyer." Eleanor had driven here anyway, unable to stay away, unable to stop thinking about the look on Daniel's face when his mother disowned him. The way he'd mouthed, "I'm sorry," like he was the one who'd done something wrong. Her phone buzzed. "Nina, news just broke. Harrison Calloway had another heart attack. He's at Mercy General. Critical condition." Eleanor's hands shook as she read the message. Another one. She thought of the old man in the courtroom, oxygen tubes snaking around his face, tears streaming down his cheeks as his grandson destroyed everything he'd built on lies. She should feel victorious. She should feel vindicated. Instead, she felt sick. Her phone rang. Margaret Shaw, her voice urgent. "Eleanor, we need to talk. Now." 20 minutes later, Eleanor sat in Margaret's office, still dripping rainwater onto the expensive carpet. The investigation moved fast, Margaret said, spreading documents across her desk. James Corleone confessed. Not just to the forgery, to everything. He's trying to cut a deal by throwing Harrison under the bus. She paused. "Eleanor, it's worse than we thought." "How could it possibly be worse?" Margaret slid over a deposition transcript. "James claims his father, Harrison, ordered him to create the forged dissolution document the moment you filed suit. He also claims Harrison destroyed the original letters between himself and Samuel, the ones Daniel found. James kept copies as insurance." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Daniel's father. The heart attack. James won't go that far on record. But reading between the lines, Margaret's expression was grim. Richard Corleone found the partnership agreement 10 years ago, just like Daniel suspected. He confronted Harrison. 3 days later, Richard was dead. James implies Harrison may have tampered with his son's heart medication. The room spun. Murder. Not just theft, not just fraud, but murder to cover up theft. "There's more," Margaret continued quietly. "Harrison's will. James provided a copy. Everything goes to Daniel. The entire estate, the company, all of it. Because Daniel is the only grandchild who carries the Corleone honor." That's a direct quote from the will. Eleanor's throat closed. He knew. Even as he was destroying Daniel, Harrison knew he was giving him everything. "Guilt," Margaret said. "Or control. Maybe both. But here's what matters. If Harrison dies before this case concludes, Daniel inherits a company that's legally 50% yours. He becomes your de facto business partner. Unless he hates me for destroying his family." "Does he?" Margaret asked gently. Eleanor thought of the kiss in Daniel's apartment, the way he'd looked at her in the courthouse, the bruise on his face from defending the truth. "I don't know anymore." Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. She answered without thinking. "Eleanor." Daniel's voice, rough and exhausted. "Don't hang up." Her heart stopped. "How are you calling me?" "My lawyer's phone. I have 3 minutes." He paused. "My grandfather is dying. I heard. Eleanor, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go see him." "What?" Eleanor nearly dropped the phone. "Daniel, I can't. Please." His voice cracked. "He's asking for you." Not me. Not my mother. You. He said he needs to tell you something before he dies. Something about your grandfather. Eleanor's mind reeled. This could be a trick. His lawyers. I know it could be. But what if it's not? Daniel's breathing was ragged. What if he wants to confess? What if there's something about Samuel we don't know? Eleanor, you fought so hard for your grandfather's legacy. Don't let it end with questions. Come with me, Eleanor whispered. I can't. I'm in custody until tomorrow's hearing. But I trust you to do this. A pause, heavy with everything unsaid. I trust you, Eleanor. Even if you decide to let him die with his secrets. The line went dead. Mercy General's ICU was hushed, sterile, smelling of antiseptic and dying hopes. Harrison Calloway lay in room 347, surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred, keeping him tethered to life by threads. Victoria Corleone stood outside the room like a sentinel. When she saw Eleanor, her expression twisted with such hatred that Eleanor nearly turned back. He asked for you, Victoria said, each word dripping venom. I don't know why. I don't understand what you've done to this family. But he's dying, and he won't rest until he sees you. So go in. Finish destroying us. Eleanor stepped past her, into the room where Harrison Calloway lay dying. He looked smaller than she remembered, shrunken. The oxygen mask covered most of his face, but his eyes, those pale blue eyes that had stared at her in shock when she'd found the partnership agreement, were alert and desperate. Eleanor, he rasped as she approached. Sit. She did, perching on the edge of the visitor's chair, hands clasped to stop their trembling. I'm dying, Harrison said unnecessarily. Hours, the doctors say. Maybe less. His hand fumbled toward her, shaking. I need you to know something. About Samuel. About that night. Eleanor's heart hammered. What night? The night he died. Harrison's eyes filled with tears. He didn't die of heart failure, Eleanor. Not naturally. The world stopped. We argued. Harrison continued, his voice breaking. About the partnership. He'd found out I'd filed the patents under only my name. He was furious, said he'd go to a lawyer, said he'd expose what I'd done. We fought. I grabbed him. His medication was on the table, Digitalis, for his heart. In the struggle, the bottles spilled. He choked. I didn't mean to mix them up. I didn't mean for him to take the wrong dose. Eleanor couldn't breathe. He trusted me to give him his medication that night. He couldn't read the bottles anymore. His vision was failing. I handed him the pills. I watched him take them. And I knew. Harrison's sob was gut-wrenching. I knew they were the wrong ones. I knew it would kill him within hours. And I let him take them because I was a coward who wanted his company more than his best friend. You murdered him, Eleanor whispered. Yes. The word was barely audible. I murdered my brother. For money. For success. For an empire built on his grave. Harrison's grip on her hand tightened with surprising strength. I've carried that for 50 years. It ate my son alive when he found out. It poisoned everything. And now it's killing me. Why tell me? Eleanor demanded, tears streaming down her face. Why now? Harrison's smile was bitter and broken. Because Daniel chose you over me. Over everything. And that means there's still hope that something good can come from all this blood. He reached toward the bedside table, pulling out an envelope with shaking hands. This is a confession. Signed, witnessed by my doctor. Everything. The murder, the theft, the fraud. Give it to the judge. Let the truth be known. Eleanor took the envelope with numb fingers. One more thing, Harrison whispered. Samuel forgave me. That night, as he was dying, he knew what I'd done. And he forgave me anyway. He said, Harrison's voice broke. He said he hoped I'd use the company to do good. To take care of his family. To honor what we built. But you didn't, Eleanor said. No, I didn't. I was too much a coward for that too. Harrison's eyes searched hers. But Daniel isn't. He's better than both of us. He's what Samuel and I should have been. Promise me. Promise me you'll let him help you rebuild what I destroyed. Eleanor looked at this dying man, this murderer, this thief who'd stolen everything from her family. And she thought of Daniel's bruised face. His tearful eyes. His choice to stand for truth even when it cost him everything. I promise, she whispered. Harrison Calloway smiled. Thank you. His eyes drifted closed. Tell Daniel I'm sorry. Tell him he was right. The heart monitor's beep began to slow. Eleanor sat there, holding the hand of her grandfather's killer, watching him slip away into whatever judgment awaited. And she knew that tomorrow, everything would change. The emergency hearing convened 36 hours after Harrison Calloway's death. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows, corporate lawyers filling the gallery. Victoria Corleone sitting ramrod straight behind the defense table, her face a mask of grief and fury. The air crackled with anticipation. Harrison's death had made national news, and rumors of Eleanor's deathbed visit had sparked wild speculation. Daniel sat beside Eleanor this time, finally released from custody after the charges were dropped. His suit was rumpled, shadows darkened his eyes, but when his hand found hers under the table, his grip was steady and sure. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. "My grandfather's confession is enough. You've won." "It's not about winning anymore," Eleanor whispered back. "It's about making sure everyone knows the truth. All of it." Judge Richardson entered, and the room fell silent. "This court has reviewed the evidence submitted by both parties," she began, her voice cutting through the tension, "including the confession provided by Harrison Calloway before his death. This is an extraordinary case with extraordinary circumstances. Ms. Ripley, Mr. Kane, are you prepared to present final arguments?" Margaret Shaw stood. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, my client would like to make a statement." Eleanor rose on shaking legs. Every eye in the courtroom fixed on her, the cleaning woman's daughter who'd brought down an empire. She clutched Harrison's envelope, its weight both burden and vindication. 50 years ago, Eleanor began, her voice quiet but clear. "My grandfather Samuel Ripley and Harrison Calloway were best friends. Brothers. They built something beautiful together, a company based on innovation, partnership, and trust. But when Samuel got sick, when he became vulnerable, Harrison betrayed him." She opened the envelope, pulled out the confession. "This is Harrison Calloway's signed statement, given to me hours before his death. In it, he confesses to murdering my grandfather by deliberately giving him the wrong heart medication. He confesses to stealing the patents they designed together. He confesses to 50 years of fraud, theft, and lies." The courtroom erupted. Victoria Corleone's face went white. Thomas Kane dropped his pen. Judge Richardson's gavel cracked like thunder. "Order." Eleanor continued, her voice stronger now. "Harrison also told me something else. He said that as my grandfather lay dying, knowing what Harrison had done, Samuel forgave him. He asked Harrison to use the company to do good, to take care of his family, to honor what they'd built together." Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but she didn't wipe them away. "Harrison failed that promise. For 50 years, he failed. My family suffered in poverty while the Calloways lived in luxury built on my grandfather's grave. But here's what I realized sitting with Harrison as he died. Continuing this cycle of pain doesn't honor my grandfather's memory. Samuel forgave. He believed in redemption even after ultimate betrayal." She turned to look at Daniel, whose eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Harrison's grandson isn't his grandfather." Daniel Corleone stood up for truth when it cost him everything. He chose justice over loyalty, honor over comfort. He's the man his grandfather should have been, the man my grandfather would have wanted as a partner. Eleanor faced the judge again. "Your Honor, I'm not dropping this suit. The law needs to recognize what was stolen. But I'm proposing a different resolution. Calloway Manufacturing, which should have been called Calloway and Ripley Manufacturing, will be restructured. 50% ownership transfers to the Ripley Family Trust, as it always should have been. But instead of liquidating or fighting over control, I propose that Daniel Corleone and I run it together. As partners, the way our grandfathers should have done." The courtroom exploded again. Victoria shot to her feet. "Absolutely not. You can't just give our company to. It's not your company, Mother." Daniel's voice cut through the chaos as he stood beside Eleanor. "It never was. 50% belongs to the Ripley family. Legally, morally. And I agree with Eleanor's proposal." He addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, as the sole heir to Harrison Calloway's estate, I have the authority to restructure the company. I support Ms. Ripley's plan. Moreover, I propose that we establish the Samuel Ripley Innovation Fund, $50 million from the estate's assets to provide education and opportunities for underprivileged families. The families like Eleanor's that my grandfather's greed destroyed." "Daniel, no." Victoria's voice was anguished. "That's your inheritance. You can't just give it away to people who deserve it." Daniel's voice was gentle but firm. "To honor a man who was murdered for his partnership? I can, Mother. And I will." Thomas Kane stood slowly. Your Honor, if I may. After reviewing Harrison Calloway's confession and the overwhelming evidence of fraud, the defense acknowledges that Ms. Ripley's claim to 50% ownership is valid and indisputable. We recommend the court accept the proposed partnership structure. Judge Richardson studied Eleanor and Daniel for a long moment. This is highly unusual. You're asking this court to not only recognize your ownership claim, but to endorse an ongoing business partnership between parties from families with such traumatic history. Yes, Your Honor, Eleanor said. Because the alternative is letting the trauma win. Letting what Harrison did poison another generation. My grandfather forgave. I choose to honor that forgiveness while still demanding justice. The judge's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Ms. Shaw, do you have the proposed restructuring documents? Yes, Your Honor. Margaret distributed copies to the court. Full restitution, recognition of Samuel Ripley's contributions, equal partnership going forward, and establishment of the Innovation Fund. Additionally, all patents will be refiled under both Calloway and Ripley names, acknowledging Samuel's original contributions. Judge Richardson reviewed the documents with meticulous care. The silence stretched until Eleanor thought she might shatter from the tension. Finally, the judge looked up. In all my years on the bench, I've never seen a case quite like this. Murder, fraud, theft spanning 5 decades, and a resolution based on forgiveness and partnership. She paused. The court finds in favor of the plaintiff. Eleanor Ripley's claim to 50% ownership of Calloway Manufacturing is valid and legally binding. Eleanor's knees nearly gave out. Daniel's arm came around her waist, steadying her. Furthermore, Judge Richardson continued, this court endorses the proposed partnership structure and commends both parties for choosing a path of restoration over retribution. The company will be officially renamed Calloway and Ripley Manufacturing, as it should have been named from the beginning. This case is closed. The gavel fell. For a moment, Eleanor couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't process that it was over. 50 years of injustice, finally acknowledged. Her grandfather's name, finally restored. Her family's legacy, finally recognized. Then Daniel turned her to face him, his hands cupping her face, his eyes bright with tears and joy and love. We did it, he whispered. We did it, she agreed. And as the courtroom erupted around them, reporters shouting questions, Victoria Corleone storming out, Margaret Shaw pumping her fist in victory, Eleanor and Daniel stood together in the eye of the hurricane. Two people who'd chosen to build something new from the ruins of something broken. Partners? Daniel asked, his smile tentative and hopeful. Eleanor thought of her grandfather and Harrison as young men, building dreams together. She thought of all that had been lost, all that could still be rebuilt. Partners, she said, and kissed him as cameras flashed and a new chapter began. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the lobby of Calloway and Ripley Manufacturing, staring at the newly installed memorial wall. Two faces smiled out from the vintage photograph. Young men in their 20s, arms slung around each other's shoulders, standing in front of a small factory building. Samuel Ripley and Harrison Calloway, 1953, the brass plaque read. Founders, partners, friends. Below the photo, Eleanor had insisted on adding Samuel's words, preserved from one of his letters. True partnership means building something bigger than ourselves, something that outlasts us, something that makes the world better. You okay? Daniel's voice came from behind her, warm and familiar now. His hand found the small of her back, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the past 6 months. I'm thinking about what they lost, Eleanor said softly. They could have had this. A real partnership. A legacy built on truth instead of lies. But we have it now. Daniel pulled her closer. We're giving them the ending they should have had. Eleanor turned to face him, still marveling at how much had changed. Daniel's face had lost its haunted shadows, replaced by something gentler, more hopeful. He'd moved out of his family's mansion into a modest apartment downtown, starting fresh, he'd said. His relationship with his mother was still fractured, but they were talking now, slowly rebuilding on foundations of honesty instead of appearances. The new apprenticeship program starts next week, Eleanor said, pulling out her tablet to show him the applications. 60 students from underprivileged backgrounds, full scholarships through the Samuel Ripley Innovation Fund. Engineering, design, manufacturing, everything Granddad loved. Daniel's smile was pure pride. He would have loved this. Teaching the next generation. And look at this. Eleanor scrolled to another document. Nina helped me find her, Samuel's sister's great-granddaughter. She's been working 3 jobs to put herself through community college. The fund is covering the rest of her education. Full ride to MIT's engineering program. Family taking care of family, Daniel murmured. The way it should have been all along. The lobby doors opened, and Christine Ripley entered, moving with a confidence Eleanor had never seen in her mother before. No more cleaning uniform, no more arthritic hands clutching mop handles. Christine wore a tailored suit, simple but elegant, and carried herself like someone who finally knew her worth. "Mom," Eleanor rushed to embrace her. "How was the doctor?" "Good news." Christine's smile lit up her whole face. "The new treatment is working. The arthritis is manageable now. Dr. Morrison says with the therapy and medication, I should regain most of the mobility in my hands." She held them up, fingers straightening more each day. All thanks to the company insurance. Real insurance, not the bare minimum. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Granddad would be so happy. "He is happy, sweetheart." Christine touched the photograph on the wall, her fingers tracing Samuel's face. "Wherever he is, he knows the truth came out. His name is restored. His family is cared for. That's all he ever wanted." Daniel cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ripley, I wanted to show you something before the ceremony." He pulled out an architectural blueprint. "The new research and development wing. We're breaking ground next month. It'll house the innovation labs where the scholarship students will work. And Eleanor and I decided on a name." He unrolled the plans. Across the top, in bold letters, the Samuel and Harrison Ripley Callaway Innovation Center. Christine's hand flew to her mouth. Both their names. Together. "The way it should have been," Eleanor said. The partnership they dreamed of, finally realized. Not perfect, not without pain, but honest. "And the executive board approved?" Christine asked. Daniel grinned. "When the COSOs both agree, the board tends to fall in line. Plus, the company's stock value has increased 40% since we announced the restructuring. Turns out transparency and social responsibility are good for business." The irony wasn't lost on Eleanor. That doing the right thing, the thing Harrison had been too afraid to do, had made the company more successful than ever. They'd opened their books, acknowledged the past, committed to reparations and opportunity. And instead of destroying them, it had transformed them into an industry leader in ethical manufacturing. Speaking of the ceremony, Christine said, checking her watch, "We should head to the conference center. The mayor is expecting us at 2. Today was the official unveiling, not just of the Innovation Center plans, but of the new company charter, the scholarship program, and the permanent memorial to Samuel Ripley's contributions to American manufacturing. The governor would be there, the media, industry leaders, and most importantly, the 60 scholarship recipients who represented everything they were building." As they walked toward the car, Eleanor's phone buzzed. Nina, texting a photo from inside the conference center, standing room only. "This is huge." Eleanor showed Daniel, and he laughed. "Ready to give your speech?" "Are you?" "We're giving it together," he reminded her. "Partners, remember?" Eleanor laced her fingers through his. "Always." The conference center was indeed packed. Eleanor stood backstage with Daniel, peeking through the curtain at the hundreds of faces waiting for them. She spotted Nina in the 3rd row, giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up. Margaret Shaw sat beside the mayor, looking pleased with herself, as she should, having orchestrated one of the most significant corporate restructuring cases in recent history. And there, in the front row, sat Christine Ripley next to an empty seat. A seat reserved in memory of Samuel Ripley, a small photograph of him placed carefully on the chair. 2 minutes, the stage manager called. Daniel took both of Eleanor's hands, turning her to face him. "I need to ask you something before we go out there." Eleanor's heart stuttered at the seriousness in his expression. "Okay, we've been partners in business for 6 months now. We've rebuilt a company, established a legacy, honored our grandfather's memories." He paused, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. "But I want more than a business partnership, Eleanor. I want everything. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up every morning knowing we're choosing each other, choosing honesty, choosing love." Eleanor's breath caught as Daniel pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. This isn't about money or companies or legacies, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. This is about you and me, choosing to write a different story than our grandfathers did, choosing to build something based on trust and truth and love. He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond ring. Eleanor Ripley, will you marry me? Eleanor looked at this man who'd given up everything for truth, who'd stood beside her when it cost him his family, who'd chosen justice over comfort, love over legacy, who'd helped her transform pain into purpose and grief into grace. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes. Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, and they kissed as the stage manager called 1 minute, and the sound of the waiting crowd filtered through the curtain. Ready to face the world? Daniel asked, his forehead pressed to hers. With you? Always. They walked onto that stage hand in hand. Eleanor Ripley and Daniel Corleone, co-CEOs of Callaway and Ripley Manufacturing, partners in business and life, proof that sometimes the best revenge against injustice is building something better. The applause was thunderous. Eleanor stepped to the microphone, Daniel beside her, and began. 50 years ago, 2 young men had a dream. And as she told the story, the whole story, the beautiful beginning and the tragic middle and the redemptive ending, Eleanor felt her grandfather's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. Samuel Ripley's legacy wasn't just a company or a name on a building. It was this: the truth spoken, the wrongs acknowledged, the future built on foundations of justice and love. In the front row, Christine wiped away tears. The photograph of Samuel seemed to smile in the lights. And Eleanor knew, with absolute certainty, that this was exactly what he'd wanted all along. Not revenge, not destruction, but restoration, redemption, a second chance at the partnership that should have been realized through the next generation. The story that began with betrayal ended with hope. The legacy stolen was finally restored. And 2 families, torn apart by greed and lies, were beginning to heal together. Thank you so much for being here for this incredible journey. If this story moved you, if it made you believe in justice and redemption and second chances, please drop a comment below telling me your favorite moment. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button and join our community of people who believe that truth always wins in the end. Until next time, remember, your legacy isn't what you take. It's what you give, what you build, and how you treat the people who trust you. See you in the next story.